I guess, to start this conversation, why don't you just give us a little bit of your background and who you are and where you came from and how you got to where you are now?
Well, my name is Julie Vielbaum, and my background is a interesting mixed diversity of experiences. I traveled all over the world as a child. I moved every 2 years. I grew up in a military family, and I did not grow up in a particularly religious family, but I came to where I'm at now through 41 years of different journeys and experiences.
Out of your experiences, out of those 41 years of experiences, what was the one defining experience that brought you to Torah, you think? Or was it one, or it might have been multiple experiences?
No, it was one. Well, there was one that opened the door, and then there was a second one that made it so that I couldn't turn back. But the first experience I had was I grew up in a secular home. Nobody was particularly religious, but because we did move every few years, it seemed like, we didn't have Google Maps or the internet in the 80s and then the 90s. So whenever we moved, my parents would put us into private schools. And I was exposed to a little bit of religion then, but it wasn't a part of any routine that we had at home. It was a class at school. It was something that I experienced there.
We're not talking Catholic school or a Christian school, or is it?
Yes. So, well, both, because it was just whatever private school was in the area. So there was just a regular Christian school. Like when I lived in Long Beach, it was Life and Light Christian school. And, but then other times it would be a Catholic school, simply because predominantly in the 1980s, those were the private schools that you had. Catholic schools really dominated the private school business realm in those times. But we didn't always go to private school either. It was something that we did initially till we got to know the area. So I had a mixture of public school, private school, and even international school when I moved overseas.
That makes you pretty diverse and different backgrounds when it comes to different religions. Or were you exposed to just mainly Christianity in these schools?
In the schools in the United States, it was mainly just Christianity. And then when I went overseas, it was Islam. But the school that I went to overseas wasn't a religious school, because it had to cater to multiple nations that were living in that Middle Eastern country. So it was an international school. So we were required to learn Arabic, but not any religion. But I was still exposed to the religion there, because it was the opposite of the United States. The United States, you selectively choose what you're exposed to. Where I lived, it was dominated by Sharia law. So it didn't matter if you went to a secular school, you're going to hear that prayer call, 3 times a day. Right. And you're going to be exposed to it outside of school.
And now being exposed to it, did it interest you at all outside of being exposed to prayer, to wanting to study the Quran? Or were you young during this time? I'm guessing you were young.
Yes, I was young, but before we even moved to the Middle East, I had friends who were Muslim. They were from Kuwait, which is very different because, Kuwait is not run under Sharia law, so it's a very different experience. But even then, I didn't have any desire for it. My desire was playing with my friend. That was it. When I lived in the Middle East, my desire was to still just play with my friends and get through school. I saw it as cultural, not religious, because I didn't have any interest. If my best friend, her name was Huda, she didn't even speak English. We literally developed this best friendship and would spend every day with each other, and we didn't even speak the same language. We would play Barbies, and there's so many ways that kids can communicate with each other just by pretend, because that's a universal language.
Right, absolutely.
it wasn't she was over here because her father was here for due to, the Desert Storm. They were only in the United States temporarily until they went back to Kuwait. So it was still very much a part of her family's everything. We would be playing Barbies. The prayer rugs would come out because it was her time for her brother, Khalid, to start praying or whatever. So right. It was full immersion in their home. Like, Islam was very heavily practiced. But I just didn't, at that age, I wasn't curious.
Being exposed to in their house with the prayer call and everything like that. But growing up in a secular house, did you even really know what that was? Or did you ask? Do you remember?
I didn't ask too many questions about it. Having different beliefs and cultures wasn't foreign to me ever, because we were always moving and meeting different people. So before I had met Huda, who was from Kuwait, prior to that, I'd been exposed to a family from Pakistan. So it was something I was always kind of the minority wherever I was living growing up. I mean, even in Long Beach, it was a totally different experience from having a Pakistani neighbor. But I just had so many beautiful opportunities to see different ways of life that it was just, being different was what was normal.
That's a good quote. I like that quote. Being different was normal.
Yeah.
So at what age did you experience your first, I guess, where you felt like, hey, there might be something here with God? There might be some kind of connection, whether it be within Christianity, Catholic school, or something outside of that.
Well, it wasn't because of any school. I was very little. Like I want to say before kindergarten, even, or around that age, that I was playing with my friend, and my mom was talking to my friend's mom. I don't even remember who I was playing with. But I would put the curtains on my head, and I would tell mom that my mother, I was going to grow up and serve God. And it was just something instinctually that I always kind of felt that I wanted to do. And what was funny is my sister was the exact opposite, always. So it was something I believed in. Ever since I was a little kid, I just didn't have a particular way to define that within a religion. I didn't define that within Christianity or Islam or Judaism or anything. I just knew there was a God.
You just knew there was a God. So what about as you were, going to these different private schools, Christian, Catholic school, at any time did you say, hey, there's something here? Or was it until you, or maybe not even in school, outside of school?
Well, we were always in and out of private school. So in my elementary school years, I never paid attention. I was busy getting in trouble, socializing, not sitting still. Like it was
being a kid.
Right. Religion was seriously just a class where I had to sit still and I couldn't make noise. It was nothing I paid attention to or connected to. And then, when I wasn't in private school, I was in public school. So there was no connection to God through my experiences at the private schools until I was a teenager, but those weren't necessarily positive. As a teenager, we came back from the Middle East and we went to a private school, and it was a Catholic school, and I got expelled. Yeah. I mean, I was asking a lot of questions because at that point now I'm at this age where I can engage in a different capacity.
Now, were you questioning authority, or were you questioning some of the teachings?
All of it. Because I didn't understand why priests who aren't married can give marriage advice to people. That didn't make any sense to me. I didn't understand why I had to do reconciliation and tell a priest all of my sins because he told me he's a microphone to God. That's stupid. It was just a lot of different...
And you realized that at what age?
Let's see. I was in 8th grade.
Wow. That's that level of consciousness, and that realization of those things, and being exposed to that says a lot about, I think, your soul. You know what I mean? Like, I always tell people, I never understood the saying when people said, that person's got an old soul. I was like, what does that mean? And then, once I started studying Torah and understanding Gilgal and soul roots and everything else, you're like, I get it now and I understand it. But, that's what I think, you being, to have that realization at that age, that there's no barrier. There doesn't need to be a barrier between you and God and your relationship. In other words, there's a person, a man in flesh. That's a high level of consciousness to have at that age, I think.
I've never thought of it that way. Because we can, my perception is only through my experiences, I guess. So, but it wasn't just my questioning then that got me expelled. Like, I started to rebel against the entire infrastructure because I didn't want to be there. And asking those kinds of questions alone is not going to get you expelled from a Catholic school, right, or any kind of school. But it was just, there are some people that you meet in life where you instantly click. And then there are some places or people where you go and you're instant enemies.
Yeah,
and
absolutely.
And I just, whenever I was in a Catholic setting, I was uncomfortable, I was agitated, and I didn't like it.
I mean, yeah, I've heard the same thing from other people. Maybe not just Catholic, but within a church setting. I've heard that exact same quote.
The statues creeped me out. Didn't like any of it. So, but my mom begged them to take me back for my 9th grade year. So I was expelled from my 8th grade year, went back my 9th grade year, and then after that, I was sent to public school for the remainder of my education until I graduated.
So from pretty much your whole high school years, you were in public school. Is that correct?
Right. Yes.
Okay. And how did you think that had any? You think that was more of a relief to be out of that setting, that Christian Catholic? Well, you said Catholic school. That Catholic school setting made you feel more comfortable, where you could engage into the education better, or was it just you just didn't want to be there and it didn't matter where you were as long as you weren't there?
I did like the public school setting simply because I could actually join different clubs. I mean, private schools in general, at least the ones that I experienced, were limited. That's it. Everybody here is Catholic. There is no diversity in beliefs or anything like that, which is fine, because there's Jewish schools and that's how it's supposed to be. But Catholicism wasn't for me, so it wasn't working. In public school, I could join, a philosophy club or whatever and explore different options.
Right. So within the public school setting, was there ever anything that ever happened that through that setting that maybe drew you one way or another towards God, or was it after school at that point?
No, it didn't draw me to God at all. There was nothing in a public school that will. If anything, I just became just as secular as my family at that point. Nobody
you met within the public school, a friend, had a relationship with anybody that was religious, or a friendship, and that nothing like that developed in public school?
No, because I was always the new kid. So by the time I finished 9th grade, we'd moved again. And my 10th grade year, I was always the new kid in school. So I just
never time to develop those relationships.
Correct. So I just dove right into theater and went into my imagination, because I was always an artist and I love to tell stories and read, books, watch movies. So that's what I did. But it didn't pull me towards God at all. In fact, like I said, I just was as secular as my family. And at a certain point in time, I kind of forgot who I was. And I went through a really dark period in my life, and I lost my joy.
So when you say you forgot who you were, what do you mean by that? Do you mean that, your values, your family values, or just who you are, who you wanted to be as a young child, and who you ended up being?
Correct.
Is that what you're saying?
Correct. So when I remembered who I was, it happened in like several different times in my life, but the biggest awakening of that was I was walking my dog Shiloh, and while I was walking her, I just had this sudden burst of joy hit me that I hadn't felt in years. And I remembered that promise that I had made where I said that I was going to grow up and serve God. And it affected me so greatly that when I brought my dog back to my apartment, I laid in my bed and I tossed and I turned and I thought about it all day until it turned night. And it literally got to me to the point where I ran back outside to the field and I fell to the ground crying, begging to know who God is. Because that's what I had been missing. And that's who I was. That's what I always wanted to do. And then that's what I mean when I say I forgot who I was.
So was it a longing for purpose that you think that was missing within you? And then the realization of, oh no, that wasn't it. Okay. So
no, it wasn't a longing for purpose. It was like I felt like I had this relationship with God that I never fully understood, but it was gone. And then I realized I didn't even know who God is because I never accepted any of the theology that I was taught. But even though I rejected all the theology I was ever exposed to, it still never shook me from wanting to serve God. I just didn't want to serve their God. And so I realized that my desire to serve God was still very much alive. It had been reignited, but I didn't know who he was. I didn't know who God was. So
you never rejected God. You just rejected the society's version of God.
Yes. Yeah. And it was like this missing, like this longing, like it was just this sad feeling of, I need you, God, because I don't know who you are. I needed God in my life. And so then the next day I went to work and there was, we all had assigned seats and they had done a seating rearrangement. And the person that they sat down next to me was reading this book called The Torah. And it instantly caught my attention. I have my Zadie, my grandfather is Jewish. And I always knew culturally that he was Jewish, but he was also secular. I had his wild curly hair. There were comments kids made to me that were actually anti-Semitic, and I had no idea they were when I was a kid. And my mom would have to explain it to me. So I was very well aware that I was different and that I had Jewish roots. And that Torah instantly caught my attention.
So this all happened, as a young adult. I mean, before a family. Did you already have a family at this point, or was this just your journey?
I had a son. So I was married at 19. I had my son at 20. And then I divorced in my very early 20s. And it was several years after my divorce that this started happening.
Okay. So you're at work and you see somebody reading the Torah. Did you ask questions to him or did you go out and buy a Torah?
No, absolutely. I randomly accosted him. What is that? What are you reading? And they were very excited to tell me everything about it. Invited me to their congregation. I just didn't know at the time that he was a missionary.
Okay. So he's reading the Torah, but he was a missionary. So what was his background?
I don't know what his particular background was because we were talking about the Torah, but I could tell you that when he brought me to the congregation, when I finally decided to go, because it took me a little while to agree to it, I hesitated at first, but it just every single day I would see that book, and I finally really wanted to go see, and I went to a Hanukkah service and I heard the Shema, and that was it. I was hooked. But when he introduced me to everybody, he said, she's a, what did he say? I think it was, she's a Judah, I think is what he said, because I told him about my grandfather, and that my mom's side of the family had, Jews in the family. And I went to 2 different congregations. Now, this congregation that he took me to was actually started up by a Jewish guy. And he married a Christian woman.
Okay.
And then he partnered with a formal Pentecostal pastor.
Well, that's a combination, I would say.
Right. So you get a Jew and a Pentecostal pastor, and they started this congregation. And there was obviously, their children attended this. So there was other children of intermarriage there. Mm-hmm. But there was also everybody from every walk of life, ethnicity, and background there as well.
Wow, that's that's very diverse, I would say. All those backgrounds and mixed into one congregation, especially the leadership. So I can only imagine what that was like.
Right, and for me, I was always used to kind of being the outcast because I moved so much. So everybody there was the outcast. And that's...
So you just felt like you just fit right in, huh?
I was like, maybe this will work. And plus, it wasn't right away, but eventually this individual did discuss their belief in Yeshu with me. And that wasn't foreign to me. And so I actually thought, maybe that's why I've been rejecting it for all these years. Because it wasn't Jewish, not realizing that it still isn't Jewish, like it just had the mask of Judaism on it. Right.
But that's, I experience this with other people I talk to, people that are Messianic, and it's like they're right there, and it's like, if you'll just come just a little bit and just. But, it's just like, I never understood how people get to that point and then just say, that's as far as I'm willing to go. You know what I mean? It's like, you've come this far, just come a little further, just study a little bit more. And it seems like you'd be over that hump. But, I've just come to the realization that, it's not for everybody. I just have to accept that.
Yes. And I also think that sometimes heaven taps us on the shoulders, and certain things happen that force us to reckon with the things that deep down inside we have trouble with, but maybe will not admit. At least that was true for me. So when they would pray and say, in Yeshua's name, amen, or what, I had a really hard time doing that. And sometimes I would just mumble, amen. And
why do you think that was? Why do you think you had a hard time with it?
Right. Probably because of the issues that I had when I was at Catholic school. I didn't understand the intermediary. It just took me back to that place where I'd have to go and confess my sins to a priest. I didn't understand why somebody was in the way if he's not God. And
so it sounds like you automatically have a knee-jerk reaction to that. A man, having to pray and use an in-between, to have a relationship or to pray to God. It seems automatic natural to you is what it sounds like.
I think so. Yes. I had no problem, doing praise and worship. And sometimes we would shout that name out when we did that, but I wasn't praying to that person.
Right.
And it was just, but it's something I kept to myself because, a lot of conditioning within Christianity is that you're just confused. The devil's messing with you, or whatever they want to insert to make you feel like it's whatever you're feeling. Don't trust, because this is normal for you to question these things. It's it's just doubt. Don't
question nothing, and just stay with us, and everything will be fine. I've never understood that logic on anything, even outside religion. You know, that's us as human beings. It's natural. Well, you know, that's what we were given. That's that's a God-given gift to question things, you know, to the very essence of the subject matter. And when somebody, and I always tell my kids this, if somebody tells you to stop questioning it because you don't need to know it, then that's when you really need to question, you know, because there, you know, now there comes a point when, you know, yes, I do agree with faith. Just because you don't, so, you know, I always agree with the, you know, when people say, hey, I don't know, but, you know, let's find out together, you know, and that's the kind of people I draw to. And when I run into somebody that when I question something, they tell me, well, if you're asking that question, that means you don't have any faith. Well, I guess this conversation's over. You know what I mean? Because I've had that so many times.
Yes. And it's very frustrating. It got to the point where actually I took a break from everything. I wasn't really learning Torah at all at this place. I was doing praise and worship, and then after praise and worship, I would go downstairs in the nursery and I would take care of all the babies. So I was enjoying the praise and worship, and sometimes I did get to hear a little bit of what they had to teach, but I just wasn't feeling it entirely. And so this all started back in like 2007, 2008, but I took a good, I would say 2 or 3 year break from all of it, and met my current husband, who was, like you said, he was like, well, I don't know what to believe. And that was the most refreshing thing that I could possibly hear.
It really is. It really is. When, you know, when you realize, when somebody says, I don't have all the answers, I don't know what's real, that's a better base to start with than anything. You know what I mean? Because then you're open, but, you know, as long as you're, you know, as long as you're not gullible, but you're open-minded, you know, you can really go a lot of places with anything. But, you know, it's when you have a closed mind, well, this is it. And if you don't believe like this and worship like this, then you don't have a relationship with God. Then I don't know what God you, if you, you know, I tell anybody, you hear something like that, run the other way. It's better to come into it open-minded and understand. It's like, you know, Rabbi, one of our rabbis, his name was Rabbi Bassi, always used to tell us, when you get to the point when you know you don't know, then that's the point. That's where you need to be. You can only grow from that point, is what he was saying. So I think that's a very good point to be at.
Yes. And I didn't really have anybody to ask either. At that point, my Zadie had passed away. And, you know, my parents, they didn't have any, my father was an atheist. And it was just one of those, my mother, you know, she also had a general belief in God. But she wasn't a studious to the scriptures at that time. So there wasn't any theological conversations that we could have.
Right.
And so I was kind of navigating this on my own. And when I met my spouse, it was refreshing because he didn't know, but he came from a very religious home, which was the opposite of what I was coming from. So I came from this secular home. And I have this, you know, blind faith. He comes from a super religious home, and he's like, I'm not so sure.
Yeah, it just goes to show, you know, when people grow up and become individuals, that, you know, their past doesn't have to dictate their reality into the future. You know what I mean? We grow up and we see the world different from what maybe we're programmed, and I think that's an amazing thing. I think that's a God thing.
Yes.
Yeah.
And then after my husband and I had our first child, I had this dream before we had our first child. It was actually right before I met him. And the dream is private, but I will tell you that within this dream, there were things that I would find out years and years later that I would later discover are actually very true Torah and Kabbalistic concepts. Oh, wow. I'll give you a very small glimpse of it. I was standing in front of a holy court in front of rabbis. And I won't go any further than that, but the fact that I didn't even know that such a thing was even existed. And that dream stayed with me, and I still couldn't shake this desire to serve God. And it's kind of like every single time I would kind of fall away, either I'm walking my dog Shiloh and I get this jolt of joy, or I get too comfortable again and then I have this powerful dream. And so after we had our first son, I said, I got to go back, because I didn't know where else to go. I knew that I needed to reconnect to God.
So you're talking about go back to the same congregation you were at, or go back to God? Okay, I got you.
Because I didn't know where to go, right. But I knew I needed God, so I just figured, let's go back there, because I wanted the Torah. And while I was there was just kind of like this very different, I guess you could say, atmosphere. Things weren't as joyful as they were when I was originally there. And I was on the praise and worship team, and we would stay behind after, service was complete, and we would practice, whatever we were doing. And I was downstairs in the basement where the kitchen was one day to get a bottle of water. And all of a sudden, I just had this creepy, awful, horrible feeling, the kind that gives you goosebumps and, makes the hair on the back of your neck stand up, as the saying goes. Right. And I didn't know what the heck that was all about, but I literally beelined it and sprinted out of there.
That's crazy.
And then I went home and I had another dream, and this horrible, just evil person appeared in the dream, and it said, your rabbi is going to cause you to be harmed. And basically was like, stay away from this place. And I did not understand that dream. And so I reached out to my old coworker, the one who had introduced me to this congregation, because by the time I went back, he was gone. He started his own congregation. And I said, why did you leave? Something's going on. Why did you leave? And he said, there's a demon in the basement.
Yeah, you went out right when you said demon in the basement. So I was sitting there going, so,
dun, dun, dun.
Yeah, I know. I was like, man, is that a setup? I wasn't sure.
Right. And see, within Christianity, they are all, they're, especially when you have a congregation that is formed from a formal Pentecostal pastor. And then, there was a lot of this concept of these unclean spirits and demon in the basement and everything. But let me back up just a little bit. Was this at the same location, but with just different leadership? Is that what you were saying? No, what I'm saying is that, it was the same location. Yes.
Okay.
It was the same leadership. My coworker who introduced me to this congregation had already left, and he started his own congregation. I never knew why he left, because I didn't work with him anymore, and he left while I was taking a break.
Right.
So after I got that really creepy feeling in the basement, I called him to see maybe why did he leave? And that's when he told me, because there was a demon in the basement.
Yeah, I know, but what I'm saying is, he left because there was a demon in that basement? Or
yes.
That's what I'm a little confused.
Yes.
So was it the location that had this bad spirit in it, or was it what was going on within this congregation? I guess that's what I'm trying to ask.
I'm not an expert, but I could tell you what they said. Okay. They think it was both. That it depended on who you ask. Some people had the opinion that it was location. Others had the opinion that this thing has been following this congregation around, because they would often do exorcisms all the time. And
they would do exorcisms?
Oh yeah. They would lay hands. You have to remember that a Pentecostal pastor.
Oh yeah. I understand the Pentecostal part, but that's just nothing. Usually, even within congregations that I've been around, if that did go on, nobody talked about it. It wasn't something that was open, it was, I've never even, let's put it this way. I'm not as well traveled as you, or, been around so much diversity as you have, but the churches around here, I've never heard of a church, a Pentecostal, a Baptist, Methodist, those are the only churches I've been around, nothing like that went on. I always thought that was a Catholic thing. You know what I mean?
Me too.
Okay, I'm glad I wasn't the only one thinking that.
No. I was just as surprised as you are because, that's, you call a priest, they say things, the person's head spins around,
Yeah.
But yeah. No, there was a gal who came in, and every time they started reading the Torah portions, they claimed that she would get really tired, really sleepy. And then they realized something was wrong with her. So everybody started laying hands on her, and they said this dark shadow popped out of her and ran out of the walls. And this was apparently a very common thing going on here. I witnessed nothing like that.
So this all was going on while you were gone, but not while you were there the first time.
Yes. It went, okay. Well, the dark shadow running out through the wall was before I got there. They were laying hands on people while I was there, but I never saw anything supernatural. I saw people praying for each other. I saw a lot of psychosomatic healing.
Right.
And I was very fascinated about the idea of unclean spirits. I mean, that was kind of cool. I was like, what's going on here? Tell me more. But I never saw anything. Even when I was in the basement, I didn't see anything. All I did was
But you felt something.
I felt a creepy feeling, and I didn't know what it was. And then I find out that this had actually been going on for a while, that the elders, is what they called themselves, of this congregation, have had meetings upon meetings about this, because somebody actually did see it. And the person who did see it, it was who saw it that got me to believe it, because the person who saw it was very analytical. They are a scientist. They were an elder there and a teacher there, but they weren't like everybody else necessarily. They weren't running down to lay hands on anybody. They liked the Torah and to teach about the Torah. And yes, they were Christian and they were Messianic, but they seemed very balanced and reasonable. And this individual said that as he was leaving the basement, he turned around and whatever it was standing right in front of him and looked at him square in the eyes. And he ran out of the basement, got into his truck, and he claims that whatever was in the basement hopped in the back of his truck, like he heard his whole trunk go thump. And he drove to there was this Jewish store in the area, and he bought as many mezuzahs as he could. Like, it terrified him.
I mean, I'm laughing, but, I think I would have done the same thing, to be honest with you. I'm laughing, but I'm thinking that's probably Brad Mace right there.
Right. I mean, I don't blame. All I did was get the heebie-jeebies, and I was out of there. I couldn't. If something stared me in the face, I'm pretty sure, I don't know, I probably would have passed out. But
yeah.
I was like, all this is going on, and you didn't think maybe you guys should tell the congregation that there's a renegade demon in the basement,
Yeah, by the way, if you're going down there.
Include that in your announcements, guys. So I left that congregation.
Right after you had that conversation with your ex-coworker, and he told you, it's probably the demons in the basement.
Oh, absolutely, because I already had
I'm done.
Yeah, I'm done. No thanks. I'm not going to experiment. I mean, I had this.
I'm interested, but I'm not that interested.
No, tell me your stories. Don't invite me.
Yeah. Right.
I mean, I had my own experience. I had the dream. That was enough for me.
Yeah.
And when I went to this new congregation, there wasn't any time to.
So how did you find out about this new congregation, or was this your coworker that was leading this? Okay.
Yeah, he started it. He was trying to become an elder at that congregation. And so when he left, he simply just started his own congregation and brought his friends with him and people like me, I was his coworker. And that's it. So we went there, and it was a very different experience because there was no praise and worship. There was no nursery. There was only Torah study. There was never time to go over what they call the New Testament. So I actually got to learn a little bit of Torah. And I was there for a few years on and off. They were a little bit far from me, so I couldn't go regularly. Plus, I had 2 kids under 2 years old at this point.
Right. Yeah, that makes studying a lot more difficult. But, going back to that, when y'all were studying the Torah, were y'all studying the written Torah, the oral Torah, all of it? Were they open to studying Talmud or Midrashic writings or no?
Okay, so I don't really know, because when I was there, I didn't know what the Talmud was or the oral teachings were. We would read a Torah portion and he would explain things, but he wouldn't tell me, or anybody really, where he was getting the information from.
He wouldn't say, hey, this is what Rashi said about, what's going on with Joseph, or he would, nothing like that.
Right. So, but he was incredibly charismatic, super intelligent, and brilliant. Like, if he was to convert, he would be probably one of the most beautiful converts. If he could let go of the idea of Yeshu. He could teach Torah in the most beautiful way that you would get captured and drawn in by the way that he was teaching the Torah. You weren't even paying attention to where the sources were coming from. But I forgot.
He had a way to draw you in and engage you into the story.
Correct.
To make you, and he gave you to where you could understand what's going on. Yeah, I've known people like that.
And it engaged my intellect.
Right.
Because they were very abstract concepts that I was like, finally, something that's tangible here. Because while I always like the arts and theater, I'm also an enthusiast of science. I love science. I love astrophysics. I like studying everything. So my intellectual side...
So you're very intellectual, and that's the way you like to learn, is what it sounds like.
Not exactly intellectual, because I was an artist. People always like to say, you're an artist or you're an intellect. I'm actually both. So, but I never really had that intellectual part of my faith stimulated before.
Okay, I got you.
And so that was good, but it only lasted a few years there.
Okay, and so how did that dissolve, or did it just, because of the traveling and the kids, it just got less and less time to go to the study, or just you just one day just said, I'm not growing here, and you moved on?
No, it was over a Purim. I wouldn't call it a service, but get together. Okay. And they played this YouTube video where this rabbi basically explains that Queen Esther had the year 1946 in little tiny letters written in the scroll, and she had asked for 2 sets of poles, and the second set of poles just so happened to be I think it was 10 like Haman's sons, and then during the Nuremberg trials there were exactly 10 Nazis that were hung in 1946. Right. And so it started to get into this, like, where the descendants of Amalek went to, and it turned into kind of a genealogy conversation. But it took a wrong turn, because then I was told that Ashkenazi Jews are not really Jews. They are like this theory of Khazarian, where they're a bunch of like Turkish converts.
Yeah, I ain't heard that one.
Yeah, it wasn't great, and something in me just became instantly infuriated. I'm very protective over my friends and family, and it just felt wrong what they were saying. It wasn't right. It felt anti-Semitic, and you have to remember that I had been a victim to anti-Semitism as a kid. Being a product of, yeah. Well, because like when I was a little kid, I'll give you an example. I came home one day and I said, "Mom, why are the kids calling me a kite? Why am I a toy?" She goes, "Sweetie, they're not calling you." She goes, "They're not calling you a kite. They're calling you something else." I thought they were saying kite, like the flying toy.
Right, right. Well, you're just a child.
I didn't hear him correctly. And so I'm very protective over my family, very sensitive to anti-Semitic comments. And I felt like that was in that realm.
Well, you sound like to me, just by having this conversation, it's not just Semitic remarks. It's anybody who has any prejudice seems like it doesn't settle good with you, no matter what culture or background you are.
That's true.
Is that correct?
Yeah, I mean, that's absolutely true. But it was a little bit more personal than that. It felt like an attack on my family. Because when he forgot that when he says stuff like that, it's not just Jews as a category. He's talking about my Zadie. He's talking about where my mother comes from. He's talking about my family. So I stormed out of there.
Did he know that about your background?
Oh, yeah.
Before this?
Yeah.
And he did this anyway?
Oh, yeah. Remember when he introduced me to the first congregation he and I both attended, he introduced me as she's from the tribe of Judah. So he knew. And, but I was so upset that night I actually woke up in the middle of the night and I prayed for forgiveness. I was like, I don't know if I'm the one that's wrong here or what I'm feeling, because I felt guilty for being so mad. But
for letting yourself get that angry. Yeah.
Right. But I prayed to Hashem and I was like, help me figure this out. Help me figure it all out. I need your help, please. And whatever your will, just let it be done. Whatever that means, even if that means that I don't have a congregation at all anymore. I don't care. I can't stop. I got to this place where I didn't want to hold back anymore. So that was it. I dove in and I was so mad, and I just kept researching that between Purim and the counting of the Omer, I figured out all of it was a farce.
Did you ever speak to the leadership again at that congregation and let them know how that made you feel, or did you just cut ties?
No, I tried to talk to them during that process. And it was very strange. He was just as annoyed with me as I was with him. So he was annoyed with me for having an issue with that concept.
He was ignored for you being upset? That's what
for having an issue with it, yes. With that concept. And it was almost unnatural. I didn't understand it. It was just like the relationship burst into flames.
Yeah, it sounds like a lot of ego-driven psychology going there, between, here I'm the leader and anything I say, I don't know why you're taking it personal, because it's just the truth. That's what it sounds like to me, and right. I've run into that a lot and I'm not going to keep, saying, all I've been exposed to is Christianity. I come from a Christian background, so I can only speak of that. And that was prevalent within that in that part of my life, in that setting. So I understand it.
Well, and I also think that sometimes, not sometimes, all the time, I think Hashem micromanages our life. And I think that he moves us and places us exactly where we're supposed to be. And when things like this happen, I know that heaven's involved in it. So this relationship probably had that extra level of turmoil to it, because that's how it was supposed to happen. I wasn't supposed to make amends and return there.
Right.
There was supposed to be friction, so I wouldn't return there.
Absolutely.
And there was no other Messianic congregations in the area. There were 3 total. I'd gone to 2 of them, and the third one was shut down. Right. It closed.
So even though this happened, you said to yourself, well, this is just a one-off and this is the way they feel, but you still felt like you wanted to be in the Messianic community. Is that correct?
Well, I wanted to ask somebody questions, like somebody else, what do you think about what they said? Because I needed a teacher and I didn't have one.
Right.
And so I was on my own. And then I went to this little Jewish store because I remember they told me that the one of the elders at the former congregation, when he thought a demon was jumping in his truck, went to this Jewish store to buy a bunch of mezuzahs. And I remembered that. I was like, I need to go there,
Right.
And so I did. And
I mean, it saved this guy from a demon, no matter, just imagine what it could do for me. That's what I was thinking.
but it was a Jewish store ran by an Orthodox Jewish rabbi. And when I stepped in there, I almost wanted to start crying because it was like I recognized this rabbi, even though I never met him. Wow. Like I just knew him. And I couldn't even speak to him because of it. Like I looked around, I bought a little tiny shofar and then got out of there.
Yeah, I've been the situation you're talking about, not exactly the same. I wasn't in a store, but the first time that I was around an Orthodox rabbi, I felt the same way. Like I had a million questions and I was just standing in front of him and I couldn't even utter hello.
No, it wasn't that. It was more
that
like,
was me,
Yes, no, I understand the shock. Yes. But what I meant was I felt like I knew him, like I was going to start crying, like almost like I was like, what's going on? Does he remind me of my Zadie? What's happening here? Like, it was just like I bumped into a long lost family member. That's the only way I can describe it.
Oh, okay. Right.
So I could, like, if he would have said hello to me, I probably would have just started sobbing and he would have thought I was a crazy person.
Right.
So I couldn't look at him because it was very emotional. And I just bought the shofar and booked it. And then when I realized I didn't really have anywhere to go, I had already emailed him a few times after that incident. And then I said, you know what? I'm going to reach back out to him.
You talking about the rabbi at the store?
Right.
Okay.
And I told him my whole story and everything else. I didn't know if my grandmother was Jewish or not. And so I'm going off the assumption that maybe she isn't, just my grandfather. And he's like, what a fascinating story. I hate to tell you, but you're not Jewish. Because, even though it was my mother's father, if my mother's mother's not Jewish, right?
Right.
But I was like, okay, that's fine. And I started to learn from him here and there. He would do these like little phone call classes. I was listening to that, but I didn't involve him in my separation from the belief in Yeshu. Like I was still working that out.
Right.
I kind of kept it hidden from everybody and until I finally got to a place where I knew what I believed.
And when did you get to that? And how did you get there?
Well, when I got mad over Purim, I decided that I was done holding back. Like it wasn't doing any good to just keep my feelings and thoughts inside. So I always wanted to know, why was the New Testament written in Greek? I started there. And then my husband said, hey, as long as you're studying, why don't you research the Essenes? And it was like, I call it the internet rabbit hole. It was one link after the other, one source after the other, the Jewish encyclopedia, things in the Torah that didn't line up. It was just all of it. So I was like, he's not Mashiach. Wait, who is this Paul guy? What's going on here? Like, and that's another thing.
Everybody always brings up Paul. Imagine that.
Yeah, well, I never liked Paul.
Yeah.
And
it seems to be a pretty common theme within, Ger Noahidism, that there's just something about Paul that just never set right with anybody.
Really?
Mm-hmm.
I didn't know that.
I mean, just from the, I can only speak about the people that I've spoke to, but it was definitely, everybody's got a Paul story.
Uh-huh. And so after the end of my research, I was like, I think Paul is Josephus Flavius. And And I almost threw up because I had believed in Yeshu. And I was like, am I really going to do this? Am I going to betray him? Because, Peter, you're going to betray me 3 times. And there's this guilt that don't you dare renounce him. Don't you dare betray him. Like, don't be a Judas, right?
You want to go to hell. Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
It wasn't so much for me, hell. It was betrayal because loyalty is huge for me. And I said, I literally had to cry my way through that, break through that wall and say, I serve God. This can't be the wall that stops me. And I just bursted through it, and that was it.
So it sounds like, along the way, I know, like you said, the 2 congregations, studying Torah with the, Messianics, but it sounds like in the end there, to let go of, Jesus was a journey you went on by yourself.
Absolutely.
Is that correct? Okay.
Yeah. I was alone. It would be late night in my office. I'd be reading, crying, reading, laughing. I mean, you would think I was like a crazy person if you walked in.
A bag of emotions.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
And so, but
well,
when
I think that's,
yeah.
I was going to say, I think when you build your framework, your psyche, your whole psychological framework is built around this persona of Jesus. And for other people, it might be something else, but Jesus. And when you remove that piece from that framework, when it can be overbearing, it can be too much, for your psyche to overcome. And that's why it seems the people that everybody I've talked to, it was a long drawn out process. Nobody's just pulled that piece out and just went forward. I've only known one person to do that, and they're a different breed, but for me and some other people I've talked to, it's a long drawn out process. Cause you start to remove that persona out of your framework, but then you always have to kind of stick it back in there because, like you said, it was betrayal. Other people, it might've been hell. Other people might be, that was their only link to God. Mm-hmm. So they felt without it, they didn't have one because they weren't Jewish or they weren't this. So their only pathway was through him. So it is a very difficult, and to do it by yourself, you're one of the first person that I've ever talked to that's just done the research and came to this conclusion by yourself. I'm sure there's other people that have, but I have not talked to anybody besides you that's gone through this and came to this realization by yourself.
Yeah. It was really hard, but I didn't feel alone. I felt like I was going home. It was scary. It was really scary, and it was emotional, but it also felt really good. And it was before the counting of the Omar hit, I'd realized it, and I soared my soul. I feel like I elevated a little bit. I don't even know what that means exactly, but I just felt better. I felt healthier. And then I was able to dive right in, and everything seemed to be going really well for about a year until my grandmother died. And then I was forced to reckon with my status at that point, because even though the rabbi had told me, look, you're not Jewish, I was like, I was so excited about learning Torah, like I had this newborn lust for it without the misconceptions of Mashiach and the misconceptions of Yeshu in the way. I didn't care what it made me. It wasn't top of mind. It wasn't a priority for me to think about my status. I just wanted to learn. And then when she passed away, I was called to go to her house, and I arrived the night before she passed, and I did everything that I could, read the Psalms, try to follow all the instructions perfectly. But she was scheduled to be cremated, and I couldn't stop her cremation. And I knew and I knew the importance of burial in Judaism. And when she was cremated, I literally, when they took her away to be cremated, I ran out. She lives in the middle of the Appalachian Mountains, in the middle of nowhere in the boonies, which is funny because she's from New York. Yeah,
that's a far cry from New York.
Oh yeah. Her story is far more fascinating than mine, but that's another podcast
Most
interview.
grandparent story. Yeah.
Oh yeah. So I ran out into the middle of the trees in the Appalachian Mountains, and I was just sobbing. I'm like, I failed. Like, I learned all of this stuff. I learned all of this Torah, and for what? I couldn't even help my grandmother. Like, I couldn't convince the executor of her will to not cremate her. And it was this devastating feeling that I had when I knew what they were doing, that all of a sudden, like, it was at that same time, I felt very convicted to get to the bottom of my status, because I can't let this happen to anybody else in my family.
Yeah. So you made it your mission to seek what you didn't know, as far as your genealogy, going back and seeing if it was true what the rabbi told you.
Yeah, because nobody had ever looked into it. I actually had a cousin whose name is Yaakov. He went to Israel on a birthright trip, and they sent him there because they just gave him the status of Sefek because nobody knew what was going on with my grandmother. And so I had to get to the bottom of it, though, because I didn't like the way that my cousin necessarily did it, because he didn't ask any questions. I didn't want to live off of a status of Sefek. I want to know.
Right.
I don't care what it makes me, a Jew, a non-Jew, whatever. I needed to know what Hashem created my purpose to be. So
now you made it your mission from that point to study your background. So yes. in doing that, where did that lead you?
Well, I found nothing at first, but I just kept digging, and then all of a sudden, I find my great-great-grandmother's buried in the Kapala Cemetery in New Jersey. And then when I looked at the Wikipedia article for that, I see that in Appleton's dictionary in 1905, it is listed as a Jewish cemetery. And I was like, I knew it! And so I called my rabbi, and he was like, whoa, that's serious. Like, when you find, your grandmother's grandmother in a Jewish cemetery, that's serious. So at that point, he's like, find all the documents you can. Find everything you can. Get everything together. And we're going to get to the bottom of this. And I did. And I was put in touch with the rabbi at Ep1 then in Australia, because they also do DNA testing. It's one of the only Ep1s that does DNA testing. Really?
And it's in Australia?
Correct. And the reason that they do the DNA testing is because sometimes people don't have documents. Right. They, especially with a lot of the Russian immigrants, and when they don't have those documents, the DNA test can maybe help fill in those holes if you can't find your papers. There's 4, but they don't just test your ancestry. They test your mitochondrial, your mtDNA.
Or markers. All right.
No, it's not markers. Here's what it is. Okay. This is important for people to understand.
Okay.
So when a baby is conceived, the mother provides an egg, and the father provides a seed. And that egg is always going to be an X chromosome. That's it. She provides the X. Now, the father is either going to provide an X or a Y. And that determines if the child is a boy or a girl. But no matter what, the mother only provides that X. That X never changes. And that has a name. And that's called a haplogroup. The name of that X, where it came from.
What is it again?
A haplogroup.
Okay.
So they could see what her mother's egg her mother, her grandmother's egg, her great-grandmother's egg, what the genetic material of that egg was going back 40,000 years in some cases, which I think is very fascinating because there's never a recombination of the maternal X chromosome in that egg, which I found fascinating since the halakha is that your mother has to be Jewish, goes up the maternal line, and it's almost like science was replicating, the way Hashem created things. Yeah. Right. So, excuse me, I have to cough.
It's okay.
Let me take a drink here really quick. But they have 4 haplogroups that they accept. And these, to my understanding, are Ashkenazi. And N1B, B as in boy, for example, is one of the haplogroups that they accept. I came back N1A. N1B comes from N1A. But it was not a part of the 4 haplogroups that the Bet Din accepts. So it was very difficult because haplogroups aren't as simple as I probably understand them to be. So even though I'm N1A, there's N1A, 1A, N1A, 1A, 1A3. They're all N1A. But there's these, it's like a tree with branches. And so even though the N1B branch came from my branch, who knows where my wild little branch went off to? It just simply was not accepted. But it made it even harder for me when I saw that there were Sephardic Jews like in Portugal and the crypto Jews, I think is what it was a CDC article that I had read about it, because that's the information in the science the Bet Din used. And so,
they use the same article to base the studies on?
What is it? The NHBI, the National Library or whatever it is, where all of like the PubMed and medical articles are shared and distributed. So the rabbis tried to use the science along with halakha to grow in their understanding of and how they can help bring, Jews home and validate people who are Jewish. Right now, they can only do 4 haplogroups, and I understand that, and I totally respect it. Right. The process was, the rabbi that I worked with was incredible. Very patient, very kind. I'm just struggling because it's so hard to see things like Appleton's dictionary says it's a Jewish cemetery. But they couldn't use that because non-Jews were eventually buried there because the cemetery was sold off.
But back when your grandmother was buried, it was considered a strictly Jewish cemetery, correct?
Not exactly. The cemetery was started by missionaries. And they would bury Jews that they converted to Christianity in that cemetery. Not their own kin. No. They had a whole separate cemetery for the Jewish people and minority people of color.
Yeah, well, I mean, the times, unfortunately, thank God we evolve as people, and I guess with that being understood, the rabbi you're working with, in the end, what did he tell you? What was his? Of course, he's saying that he can't.
Because there's non-Jews buried there, it's not a kosher graveyard. Because my haplogroup it's like both scenarios, close but no cigar.
Right.
Okay. He's like, sorry. He's like, we can't say that you're not Jewish, but we can't say that you are Jewish. And we can't convert you, like give you a mikvah just like in case, because I'm married to a non-Jew. So I would instantly be guilty of intermarriage.
Right. So
it was better to keep my status as a non-Jew. But he said, if you find any more documents, please bring them back.
Right. So, as for right now, it's just kind of open. So what do you consider yourself? If somebody was to ask you, Julie, what are you? What is your belief? Well, how would you answer that?
I would tell him the truth, that I feel like an in-between, that I accept my status, because I was so devastated by this status that I couldn't even answer the rabbi's call when he called to speak to me about it, because my local rabbi kind of gave me the news of my haplogroup results. Mm-hmm. So I already knew what the outcome was going to be. I literally couldn't get out of bed for like a day. But I remembered divine providence and everything that had happened to me. I mean, this all started with Purim and, watching that documentary and them calling Ashkenazi Jews Khazarians. Even when my grandmother died, it was right around Purim. When I got my results, it was right around Purim. We're doing this interview now, and it's right after
Purim. Yeah. Well,
and so I just thought about Queen Esther, and I said, divine providence. This is the heavenly decree.
Right.
That's it.
Yeah. It's hard sometimes to accept things when we have our own desires and what we want, and then to understand, God's guiding us on the right path, and to have that trust. At times it could be, I guess the word's frustrating, because you feel like, hey, this is where I'm supposed to be. And then you realize that God has different plans, and the peace comes when you realize that his plan is the best plan, and that's hard. Anybody that says that's easy,
yeah,
I just don't, I don't accept that. I think everybody struggles with that, and it grows your faith in Hashem to go through situations like that.
It does. And it's kind of like, have you ever, I don't know, any parent, you might tell your kid to get dressed or do something and they don't want to do it, but they do it anyway. They're like 3 or 2 years old. They're like throwing a little fit crying, but they're still putting their shoes on because you told. Yeah. That's kind of how I was.
Maybe inside out, just to.
I didn't want to do it. I didn't want to do it, but I'm doing it.
Yeah. Staring at you the whole time.
Because nullification of self, like it's not about me. Kind of reminds me of what Vindel Jones said, which is something I just recently learned. I didn't know this then. Was he wanted to find out, what the truth was about the scriptures, regardless of what that meant he would be.
Yeah.
And that's kind of how I was like, okay, regardless of what it makes me, fine. Yeah. For him, it was discovering the scriptures. For me, it was my status. But it was, I guess, maybe that same heart. Like, we just really wanted to connect. People want to connect to their creator.
Right. And one of my favorite, it's funny, you bring up Vindel. We were up at his house in Granbury, me, Russell, and a couple of friends. This is like in it's the early 2000s. And I didn't know what I was at this time. You know what I mean? I just knew this is right after Paul. Okay. So I've already exposed Paul. It's like, okay, this guy,
You do?
I got my own Paul. Huh? Yeah. Yeah. So I was at that point, but I wasn't all the way ready to give up Jesus yet. Like, it was coming. Like, I was right there. So anyways, we were up at Vindel's, and Rabbi Bass came down. And it was he got there early Friday, and it was, he was going to do a kosher Shabbat, and show us how to do Shabbat and everything. It was pretty cool, but he was having to do his evening prayers. So we were outside on the porch, and Vindel came out there, and he was trying to smoke a pipe, but it was so windy that he just gave up. And so somebody asked Vindel, I think it was John, he asked him, he said, Vindel, how did you convince a rabbi to teach you back in the day? And Vindel goes, well, I went to the rabbi, and I went up to the little school they had, and I said, hey, I want to learn Hebrew. And he said, you're a Baptist preacher. I'm not teaching you Hebrew so you can just regurgitate it to your congregation, blah, blah. He said, no, that's not. I want to learn Hebrew because there's things I need that's in Hebrew that if I can't read Hebrew, then, anybody can tell me whatever they want because I have no way of doing it on my own.
That's right.
And the rabbi said, no, he said, I'm not teaching a Baptist preacher, which he wasn't at that time. I mean, he was still tied into a church, but he was trying to transition out of there. But back then you couldn't tell nobody this. This is a different time.
Right.
So, the rabbi said, you just leave, you're wasting my time. So Vendel got up, was walking out of the room, and he turned the light off.
Mm-hmm.
And the rabbi stopped him and said, no, come back. So, I guess that's, everybody has that story, and that was Vendel's, but that was a lot of my story too, because it's like a light went off, like, hey, I know something ain't right. And then the light clicked on, and, that's being a part of, there was a lot of stuff. I think, everybody's got their story. I'm not going to get into my story, but I do know this, that, where I thought I wanted to be or needed to be was never where Hashem has wanted me to be. It's always been a little different or not exactly what I thought. And every time that happens, it seems to grow my relationship with Hashem. And I'm thankful for that. But at the time when that's going on, you're not exactly aware of it. But looking back on those situations, you're like, if that didn't happen the way it did, or if I was in that place, I wouldn't be where I'm at now. So, but so when you talk to people and somebody asks you, says, well, what do you believe? Do you just tell them, well, I believe in the Torah, I practice Judaism, I have a rabbi? I mean, how do you explain that to people? Or do you tell them this story, your background?
Well, you tell them you believe in Judaism, because you can't make up another religion. I mean, that would be idolatry. Right. How you fit into Judaism is as a Noahide, which I actually, that's what I struggle with is how to, because everybody's a Noahide. Everybody is a descendant of Noah. So, right. But I would just say, as, somebody who is, I just believe in Judaism is what I tell them. And then when they ask me, more particulars, we can go into that. But it's just such a beautifully complicated situation that has so much opportunity for discussion and opening the door to learn new things, that it's not something that you could just throw out there. You should just I think you should just tell people you believe in Judaism, and it should be an intimate conversation that allows for more explanation.
Right. Yeah, that's a good way to explain it. I think that opens the door for, somebody to be able to explore more, and just right. Trying to give them a one word answer. I'm a Noahide, I'm a Ger, I'm a non-Jew, but I noticed that this question, for some reason, when you ask people, what are you?
What are you?
Yeah. So people kind of get, and what I mean by that is, how do you identify yourself? Do you identify yourself just as a Torah observant non-Jew, that practices Judaism? And some people say, no, I'm a Noahide. Well, how's that different? You know what I mean? And then some people say, I'm a Ger, and then they'll have the reason why they say that. Another one will have to say why they say Noahide. And it's just, I think, and the reason I ask that question is because that word Noahide, for some reason, it seems to be a debate and a dividing line for us. And when I say us, is, non-Jews who study Judaism and study the Torah. It's like, right. If you don't identify as a Noahide, then what are you? And people get all twisted. And what a lot of people don't understand, I think, is that the only reason we got to where we're at today is because we're still questioning. We're not questioning God. We're just questioning, what is my next step?
Well,
how do I grow within this? You know what I mean? And sometimes there's some people that don't want to get hung up on a name. And if you can't accept that, then, then that's not for you.
Mm-hmm. Well, it kind of takes me back to when I was at that Purim get together, and the pastor was talking about Jews being Khazarian and everything else like that. The identity politics, and it just created this division. I didn't even know, never even heard of the word Noahide, but that feeling that I got that made me so angry because I had this protective reaction for my family is the exact same feeling I got when an anti-Jewish, anti-Israeli, pro-Palestinian individual was calling themselves a Noahide. That was the first time I questioned what is really a Noahide, because he said, I'm a Noahide too. I'm a descendant of Noah. And how could I look at this person who supports those who attack Israel, who want to hurt my friends that live there, and the people that I love and that I care about more than anything in this world, and he's going to look at me and tell me he's the same as me? That really bothered me. And that's when I started to investigate the word more, because I'm like, we can't be the same. I was like, there has to be a way to distinguish people from people like him versus people like me who believe in the God of Abraham, Yitzhak, and Yaakov. I mean, they cannot be the same. Otherwise, I mean, it didn't feel right.
Right. That's very understandable. And I think there's a lot of people that feel the same way you do about that word. I'm not one of them. I just, fortunate for me is I told myself a long time ago, and I can, this is strictly Brad Mace. This is nothing, I suggest for anybody else, but I told myself a long time ago that, if somebody asked me, what do you believe and what do you call yourself? Well, I'm just a non-Jew who studies Judaism, and I have a rabbi, and I'm just not Jewish. But, then people say, well, do you keep the 7 laws? What do you do? Do you keep more? And I do. I go a little bit, further. I'm not going to get into everything I do, because, this can turn into a whole different conversation. But I think that's the whole purpose of this, of kind of this, the people that's not Jewish that practice Judaism and accept Israel as the priesthood, that, that the oral Torah, we accept it as an authority, just like we do the written. It's a journey that is individually based. And I think when you start trying to tie it to a certain group or to a certain name, it loses its essence of what it is. To me.
That's exactly right. Because when I was little, I didn't promise God that I was going to be a Noahide. I promised him that I was going to serve him. I was going to be a servant of heaven. So if people really want to ask me who I am, I'm just a servant of heaven. I'm a servant of Hashem. That's it. And the way that I serve is a little bit differently than someone who's halakhically Jewish.
Absolutely.
But
and for a reason.
Yeah, we have to get past these labels. We have to get past this argument, because and we can't just get past it. Saying that isn't enough. We have to heal it, because there's a reason that this is a focus. People need to know where they belong. Identity is very important, and they need to know that they have purpose. And when we can remind people that look, here, this is who you are. You are a servant of heaven. You recognize Hashem as your creator. Whatever it is from both sides of the aisle, if we can heal it and come together, that's when the Messianic era starts, in my opinion.
And I think you're exactly right. And I think what you're saying will only make Israel stronger.
Yes.
If we're there to support them as a united, people with them. We don't have to agree, and we don't have to do everything the same way, because this is an individual journey. But to understand that this is about Hashem for the sake of heaven, the Jewish people, and accepting the authority that comes from the from the sages and the rabbis. Of course, the Torah, But, we can all get into who we study and what sage we like, and that's fine. That's the beauty of it. That's what makes Torah beautiful, and the sages are amazing. The Torah is beautiful, and if we can we can all come to agree on that, and agree that we don't have to do it all the same way. We don't have to keep Shabbat, or we can keep Shabbat. We can eat clean, or we can choose not to eat clean, and not judge any one of us on those specific things and say, well, since these people, they eat clean, but they don't eat kosher, I'm going to separate myself from, this group keeps Shabbat, but we don't really keep Shabbat. So I'm not going to be around those people. And that's the separation. That's kind of part of why I wanted to do these videos, is to show that I think if we really take account and we really look at each other, through each other, and understand that we all have the same struggles. We've almost all had, similar backgrounds at some point to come to the realization we have today. And if we can build on those principles and those experiences, I think it'll only be good for the sake of heaven.
It will, because none of that really matters. I mean, you could have somebody who is keeping Shabbos or not keeping Shabbos. What do they do with their life? When they see someone homeless on the street, are they pulling out, even if they only have a couple of cents or $1, and helping that homeless person? Are they smiling at somebody who looks sad and down? Are they holding the door open for the little old lady? I mean, it's right. what there's another rabbi. There's another rabbi that I follow other than my local rabbi, and there's two rabbis that I learned from, and the other rabbi taught me, I don't care what you believe. I care about what you do. So go ahead, have the debate. And guess what? This is not unique to non-Jews. You ask any rabbi, they're going to tell you two rabbis, 3 different opinions. So
yeah, I've heard it even more than that. I heard 2 rabbis, 10 opinions,
Exactly. There's the 70 faces of Torah. Yeah, let's all sit down together and break bread as we argue, but let's be together.
Right. Right. And I think that's a part of wanting me to do these series, like I was telling you, is because I think we have so much more to gain together. I'm not saying we have to agree, and I think debate is awesome, as long as in the context of not trying to hold yourself above another group of people or another person. And just if you're debating for the sake of heaven, to come to build a super conscious position, to understand the subject matter better, then that's what we need to be doing, not to separate each other out. And I can tell you from 2005, I would say, about the time when I started, and my background's a little similar to yours, not in the same as a child, but as far as studying, coming to Torah, that there was a gap with me too, but it wasn't 3 or 4 years. It was like 7 years, 7 or 8 years. Because I got to a point to where, well, it's a whole story, but basically where I didn't know, basically atheist. You know what I mean? I didn't know what to believe, because I thought if this was a lie, then it all must be a lie. You know what I mean? And I just kind of threw my hands up in it. And luckily it came full circle, swimming through the abyss. But, going through, I think we have a lot of these same journeys, and if we can build off of those foundations to understand, hey, we're all still learning. We all got a lot. We all got a long ways to go. You know what I mean? And me and Russell talked about this. Russell. For those that don't, I got a friend, Russell, and we kind of went on this journey together. He stayed with it, and I fell off for a while. But he always used to tell me one thing, and it's always stuck with me. As long as you don't stop moving. Meaning, as long as you still have that same fire to question, to pursue, and to dig, and it's going to get under people's skin, and it might upset them. But if you're doing it with a pure heart, meaning if you're doing it for the sake of heaven, to cling to Hashem, then don't let anybody ever push you away from doing that. And I think if we can all kind of take that message to heart, I think we'll be in a lot better place, because hearing your story, there's a lot of similarities from your story to other people I know and myself. So it's a, so
and
as
don't
of
worry
today,
about the people that, you get, and don't worry about the people you get pushed away from, because that's sometimes how you find out right where you're supposed to be.
exactly.
I got pushed away from people over that Purim service, and it led me to Orthodox Judaism. If it wasn't for the fact that I had gotten into that argument with that pro-Palestinian individual, I never would have questioned what the word no hide meant, which to me just means human being, because that's exactly what it means. Just another word for human being. These things push us for a reason, because God created both good and evil. So he's going to use the negative or positive forces of our realities to get us exactly where we need to go. And if that means that there's confrontation and people leave your life, fine, let them go.
Or in your case, a demon in a basement.
Oh my goodness. that
Yeah, that is uniquely yours. I will say that. That's the first. So, but it did make you go the other way.
Well, what's
it did push you in a different direction.
Is they didn't tell anybody. They just had these secret meetings about it.
Yeah.
And I was
that's just our demon that's in the basement. Don't worry about it.
It's just Billy. But
he's been trying to catch a ride for a while. Yeah. Wow.
Yeah, but I actually know the same individual that you do, because when I started to question, what is this word, this no hide word, the universe pushes you around exactly where you're supposed to be. And I met Mr. Russell, and I was like, that's who I want to study with.
Yeah, that's a good one.
Yep.
That's a good one, because he's been around for a long time. He's been on this journey for a long time. And, I don't think, and I think that's what you look for, going through this is experience. Somebody that has that experience is, there was a time I questioned that word for a long time, and that's, Russell. But, getting back to you just a little bit before we wrap this up, I wanted to ask you, you said you have a rabbi. Now, do you go to a synagogue and as a Noahide? Huh?
To a shul, yeah, absolutely. Okay. I mean, I don't go to services regularly because you're not supposed to drive. Excuse me, hold on.
On Shabbat, yeah.
You're not supposed to drive on Shabbos, and even though I can, I don't want to trivialize the importance of Shabbos. Like, I don't want other people in the Jewish community, other Jews, to say, look at me driving when they can't. So to avoid, to take care of them, to avoid doing that out of respect, I don't drive to shul on Shabbos. But when there's a community get together, Hanukkah, festivities and things like that, I'm right there. I love my Jewish community here. The Jewish community has warmly embraced me. I have made so many friends. They know that I'm a product of intermarriage. The conversation eventually comes up. I've never been treated poorly or badly. It's just like if I had a Jewish status, and so I feel like I have my home here with them.
Well, that's amazing.
Yeah.
So is this somebody you can call, and if you got questions, he'll walk you through it, and, or do you have another rabbi that you actually, that you study with, or is this the same rabbi?
So I have
two.
Yes. So I have my local rabbi who is like my family, and he's my Torah teacher, everything, and he's kind of like my primary care physician. So he knows, but he's not a specialist. So he can answer my halakhic questions and guide me through things. And our kids play together, and we're part of community. But then I've got another rabbi who I learn Kabbalah with, and as is appropriate, for me. And he's what you would call the specialist. That's his specialty.
Right.
The cardiologist.
Yes.
So that's how I describe it at home. There's the primary care
physician
and the specialist.
Right.
But they're both invaluable, and they both guide me, and they both, give me their sincere advice. The relationships are very different, obviously, because the specialist is not somebody local.
Mm-hmm.
And my local rabbi he's my local rabbi, so there's the relationship's closer.
Right. That's a lot of people don't have that. I've talked to some people that, like me, if it's so funny because they're the closest. There's 2 synagogues in a town close to me, about 14. I live in a rural area, but the closest town is a college town that's close to me, and there's 2 synagogues. One's Reformed and one's conservative, and so we've tried in the past to go, and it's just, and it's basically like over there, it's like, oh, you do Christmas, okay, that's fine if and I'm like, man, what is going on here? So it's just a whole different experience for me. So it's been years.
You're not losing anything if it's Reform or conservative. I said you're not losing out on anything if it's Reform and conservative.
Right. That's what I'm saying. There was no, I never felt like there was no gain of being part of that community. Good people. Right. Good people.
Right.
It's just that where I'm at, it's just not, so I think it's very fortunate that you're part of that community where you have that rabbi where you can build that personal relationship with, which, I have built some personal relationship with some rabbis, and, but it's all been online, and I mean, it's personal, I can get on and talk to them just like this, but, to have that within a community, like you said, family, that's, you're very fortunate, very blessed to have that. And, and the few people I know that do, they really prosper with it.
They do. And we don't get to see them that much because they do live about, a little bit away. It's hard for my kids because, they are homeschooled because I don't want them in the public school because they'll become just like their friends. They'll become assimilated. And so I homeschool them to teach them the Noahide laws because, and my children want to convert when they can. But it's hard for them because they see their friends within the Jewish community. They get to go to Jewish school and they don't get to go to Jewish school.
Yeah.
Because they're Noahides. And so I think it's harder for them than it is for me. But I understand. So, but how do I get them to understand? And the best thing I could do is just let them know that, hey, look, whether it's a Jewish school or it's a public school or wherever, you're exactly where you're supposed to be. And we don't know what tomorrow brings or next week or next year.
That's absolutely right.
I'm like, when you get older, remember how you feel now so that you pay any attention in yeshiva when you convert. And I give them a little trouble.
Yeah, exactly.
But we just try to make the best of it and have our own adventures, and we make plans for the future. Here's when you do get to see your friends. If you focus on the positive, it helps.
Right. Now, do you have a Noahide community locally that you're that you're involved with, or is it a lot of online community?
It's only online. I don't know a single Noahide in my area. At all. I'm the only, first of all, I'm the only one who celebrates Hanukkah in my neighborhood. I mean, everybody here, no, I'm the only Noahide I know. Everything is online, 100% online.
100% online.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Well, I guess having, the Jewish community does help. For a lot of people, it's opposite from what you're saying. They have a little bit of a Noahide community, and when I say little, I mean 2 or 3 people. You know what I mean? We kind of grew our community. Trust me, around here it's not. It's I'm going to say 4 or 5 of us that we kind of think the same. We may vary a little bit, lean a little bit this way, but I mean, we are a little bit of community. We do get together for holidays, Rosh Hashanah. Matter of fact, we have some friends that We used to have a pretty decent group that lived on close to a military base, but a lot of them moved off, over time.
With military.
But we still, yeah, of course. But we still stay in touch with them. And, they'll come in for like Rosh Hashanah. They'll drive in and do Rosh Hashanah together. And really that community stayed kind of intact because of Vendel, because we've met all these people at Vendel's house, so that's kind of how that grew. But, what's left here is just, 3-4 of us. And, even though we're close together, we do a lot of stuff online, but that's it. And that sounds like a lot of people's, situation locally. Now, have you ever looked into joining any Noahide groups online, or is that something
I'm all over the place, because here's the thing. When the Bet Din gave me their verdict, it put me in therapy. Okay. And
devastated.
I did. I had to go get a therapist. I'm like, okay, I can't take it. So he suggested
the build-up was too much.
Right. And what was hilarious is that I found this therapist because of the great credentials, and then I find out they're Jewish, and I was like, oh no. And so
flashback.
He was like, Julie, you need to make Noahide friends. Go make friends. Right. And I was like, I don't want to. But he
had your sights set on something else.
Yeah, I just wanted to wallow. And but he encouraged me to do that, and so that's what I've done. And I'm all over the place online. I'm a part of groups as much as I can be, because we all have different experiences, as you so eloquently pointed out. But each of our experience communicates to our journeys. Like heaven knew that it was going to be really good for Julie to have that Jewish community, because they're family to me too.
Right.
Being a product of intermarriage is such a hard place to be. But I don't just see them. I see my bonus baby. I see my Zadie. I see my mother, my aunts, when they look at me. So heaven knew that I needed that sense of family. But because of technology, I also get to be where it's proper for my status with the Noahide community. Because that's what my journey is. It's a little bit of in between. And for you guys, it sounds like you guys are within, your community too. What's good for you. It's just, no matter what, we all feel lonely for different reasons. But we also have a lot to be thankful for too.
Absolutely. Baruch Hashem. That's exactly right. And, and I always tell people, kind of like my last statement here, but I'll just say, where you're at now may not be where you're at tomorrow, but, just understand that if you come this far, you're there, just keep going. You know what I mean? If you've come to the Torah and found the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, then the hard work is over. If you've stopped doing Christmas and come out of Christianity, and that may be very difficult for a lot of people, especially people that come from a very Christian background, because it divides families and it upsets friendships and even sometimes marriages. And so that's why when I talk to people, I try to always understand that, I have no idea what they had to go through to get to this point. I'm not going to get hung up on one little thing they hold different than I do. You know what I mean? Because you just never know.
That's exactly right. And I'm really grateful for the online communities. And even though we can't physically have interaction, the Noahide communities I have found online have really taken me to a positive place. Because if it wasn't for me finding, Shalom 70 and Mr. Kirk and everybody else, I would feel like resentful of my status. But now my status has purpose because I'm with like-minded people.
Right. Absolutely. That always helps. Well, I'm going to let you, is there anything you want to say before we sign off? Any message you want to say to the Noahide community? No. I'm not putting you on the spot, but I'm kind of putting you on the spot.
Here's
no,
what I would.
Kidding.
Yeah, no.
Okay, go ahead.
Here is my signing off message to the Noahide community. Remember that Hashem micromanages everything. Nothing in life that happens to us just happens to us. There's no such thing as coincidence. And the one thing that I learned from the Baal Shem Tov, who's one of my favorites to study from, is that unity is the most important thing. So don't worry about the titles and the labels and the masks that we wear. Okay? Since this is right around Purim, I'm going to bring up those masks. Just remember that we're all servants of heaven. We all value and understand and recognize our Creator. And that's what should unite us. Don't let the labels that come from the tree of knowledge keep us apart. Let's focus on unity.
Baruch Hashem. Well, I thank you so much, Julie, for having this conversation. It's been a great conversation, and I hope this conversation, goes out to people and they can get this message, because I think it's got a very important message within it, and I appreciate the time.